Oh, hey there, or should I say, Nha Zhang. Today's episode is about the Hmong, and I recorded it as a special guest speaker for our class on peoples and cultures of the world. It was actually the inspiration that led me to beginning this YouTube channel. So enjoy. I'm Chase W. Beck. I have a PhD in anthropology. I'm a paleo-ethnobotanist, which means I study plant remains from archaeological sites. When I'm not in the lab studying botanical artifacts or the diets of prehistoric humans, my love of plants draws me to the kitchen. I love to share my favorite recipes with my friends, and today I'm sharing them with you on Dr. Beck's Epicurean Delights. To make Hmong pepper paste, the first thing you're going to need is some Thai chili peppers. The next thing you'll need is a tomato, some garlic, sugar. I have some palm sugar here. You can use regular white granulated sugar. Palm sugar made from a palm tree. It has a little bit more flavor in it, so it'll impart a little bit more flavor to the dish. It's sort of an unrefined sugar. Cilantro. Makrut lime leaves. You can also use the zest of a lime if you cannot find makrut lime leaves, and we will be using the juice of this lime as well. This dish needs a couple of scallions, maybe 3 to 4 scallions, and some fish sauce. Oh yeah, and a lot more peppers. This dish is mainly peppers, and I'm going to be making it in this ceramic bowl. It's sort of a large mortar and pestle. You could, if you do not have something like this, make it in a food processor. Instructions for making Kua Txob, or Hmong pepper paste. The order in which the ingredients are added is not of great importance. However, I like to work from dry to wet ingredients, and from ingredients that I want to be the most ground up to the ones which I would like to still be visible in the final dish. I start with garlic, which I grind into a paste in a large mortar and pestle. You could use a food processor if you do not have a large mortar and pestle. Once the paste has been formed, I add the Thai peppers and continue to grind and pound until incorporated. Next, I like to add the lime zest or makrut leaves if I have them, cilantro, and scallions. After those are all incorporated, I add the tomato and sugar and mash to combine. Finally, I add the fish sauce and stir or mash until thoroughly mixed. Kua Txob is best enjoyed served fresh. I find that it loses its potency after a few days. I like to prepare mine very spicy, but you can make it to whatever level of spiciness you enjoy. Let's talk about spiciness for a minute. What does spiciness mean? Generally, in the English language, when we're talking about spiciness, what we really mean is that burning sensation on your tongue that's caused by capsaicin. So, in effect, spiciness, which generally refers to all spices, doesn't necessarily specifically represent that burning sensation on your tongue. So maybe we need a different word. I'm going to propose we adopt the word capsi to represent that capsaicin feeling on your tongue, which is the source of that burning sensation. So, from here on forward, instead of spicy, let's say capsi. Here you can get a better look at that large mortar and pestle that I showed you earlier. This is more of a Thai design. The pestle is wood and the mortar is some kind of ceramic. They also make these out of the mortar can be made out of wood. Hmong people have a tendency, I've seen, to use more metal mortars, so their mortars can be made out of metal. And then we're going to be chopping things, so you got to find the right knife. This one's pretty good, but I think it might be a little bit small. Let's see what else we got here. Now we're getting someplace. This is a little bit bigger, but I think we could do a little bit better than that. Yeah, this is starting to feel real good. Almost perfect. But this is what we need. Actually, you don't need anything this large, but that's what I'm going to use this day. You could probably cut this up with whatever knife you have lying around, but I think for fun, I'm going to use this bad boy. Today we'll be making Kua Txob, a Hmong pepper dip or paste. It's a lot like a pico de gallo or a salsa. However, the ratios of the ingredients are a little bit different. It has a lot more Chile peppers than tomatoes. In fact, the dish is predominantly Thai chili peppers, which have a Scoville rating similar to habanero peppers. However, I find their flavor to be a lot sweeter and the burn to last a much shorter amount of time. One of the things I realized in my research is just the vast number of recipes there are for Hmong Kua Txob. And I think that just goes to show you that it can be tailored to everybody's taste. What they're eating in their own home is what they're going to prefer. And so each home might have their own variation of this recipe. I also read in some places that this recipe comes from the Lao and Thai people among whom they stayed, particularly during their times as refugees. So we have the garlic peeled and I'm mashing it up here in the mortar using my pestle. I'm trying to get it nice and smooth, but I will be adding other ingredients, and so it'll just continue to break down as we add other ingredients as well. I'm adding it first though because nobody wants large chunks of garlic in there. What you can do is, as you're mashing it, you can scrape down the sides as well, and just sort of generally you're aiming to break every single little bit of cell in the plant, and that each cell that you break releases more flavor. I'm gonna start chopping up the peppers here, and I'm not chopping them too finely. I like that sort of rustic texture where you have large pieces of chili pepper in your mouth as you're eating it, and these will also be mashed quite a long time, so all the cells and everything will sort of break down as we're mashing it in the mortar. But if you do want your peppers to be a little bit finer, you can take the time and chop every single one of these. You'll notice I'm not using any gloves. Some people have trouble handling peppers like these, chili peppers like these, because of the large amount of capsaicin that they have. It can irritate the skin of their hands. I don't really have a problem with that, so I'm not going to be wearing gloves during this video. Some people wear eye protection as well because it can splash. That's one of the reasons why I work from dry ingredients to wet ingredients. Now I always try to add the fish sauce last, although you'll see I don't add it last in this video because I'm a doctor and I know what I'm doing. Well, I'm going to be chopping and pounding these vegetables for a while, so while I do that, how about we take a little bit of time for a history lesson on the Hmong. The Hmong originate from about the 27th century BC, where they were found living along the basin of the Yellow and Yangtze rivers in China. Chinese and Hmong did not traditionally get along. The Hmong were very reserved and isolationist. They did not want to integrate with the Chinese, who were in favor of incorporating or at least influencing them. To this end, the Chinese enacted rules that punished the Hmong way of life, and instead of adapting, the Hmong chose to leave. Sometimes they were prevented from leaving, and there are still Hmong living in China today. However, eventually many did give up their lands to move into mountainous regions where they assumed they would not be bothered. This resulted in many Hmong migrating to mountain regions of Southeast Asia. Many settled in the mountainous regions of Laos, Vietnam, and Thailand, where many of them made a living trading with the lowland populations there. However, during the Vietnam War, many of the Hmong groups worked closely with the United States, which resulted in severe retaliation once the U.S. was no longer involved in that region. This made many Hmong become persecuted and attacked by the people in power during that time, and they ended up fleeing once again and ending up in Thailand, where they lived in refugee camps before eventually finding a place where they could make a life of their own. Hmong do live in Lao today. Their presence is reflected on the Lao 1000 Kip bill, along with two other Lao ethnicities, the Lao and the Kamu people. Let's check back in and see how the dishes come together. It looks like I'm chopping up tomatoes. After I chop up these tomatoes, I'll be adding them to the dish and pounding them with everything else that's in there already. Now is a good time to talk about the Hmong language. The Hmong language is tonal, which means that different words pronounced differently with different emphasis or tones produce different meanings. So they have a high tone, spoken with your voice raised, a mid-tone, which would be like your normal speaking voice, a low tone where you would lower your voice. They also have a high falling tone where you begin high and you travel through, and then a mid-rising where you start mid and go high, and a low checked or creaky voice, and finally they have a breathy tone. Before we get back to Hmong language, it looks like I'm adding some cilantro to the dish. The Hmong language has been Romanized, which means the characters have been replaced with Roman characters, or characters you and I would recognize as A, B, C, and D, the alphabet, and the corresponding sounds. However, the end consonant on each word represents a tone. So for example, the high tone would be represented by a B, and then the breathy tone, you would see a G on the end of the word. So each of these words, you can't necessarily try to pronounce them the way they're spelled, including that last consonant, because that last consonant is not itself sounded. It is an indication of the tone on the word that's being spoken. Back to the assembly, it looks like I've gotten the cilantro chopped up. It's a rough chop, and I'll be adding it to my dish, and again, more pounding. It takes a lot of work to get this dish nice and smooth. So now that we have mastered Hmong pronunciation, we can learn a couple of Hmong phrases. If you wanted to say hello, or just a general greeting, you would say Nya Zhong, and this translates to live well. So you're essentially saying, are you living well? Do you live well? Or you're wishing them to live well. If you wanted to ask, what's your name? You would say, Galumbe Ulekya. And then the appropriate response to that would be, my name is, and then you'd say your name, which sounds like this, Gulumbe Hutwa Dr. Beck. And then you can ask, do you speak Hmong? And that sounds like this, Halu Hmong. If you were to ever encounter Hmong while on an empty stomach, you would say, Gu Chai Pla, which means I'm hungry. And you could add heng to the end to indicate that you're very hungry. Gu Chai Pla heng. And hopefully, after you say that, you will be invited to dine with them, in which you would hear Nam all, which means eat the food. So there you go. Now you know a couple of ways to talk with Hmong people. Now, if you really want to learn Hmong well, I would hope that you would find an actual native Hmong speaker rather than someone like me who just knows a few words and phrases. I looked at what I had in the mortar already and I decided I'd like more peppers, so I'm adding them. Botany Minute. Let's talk about some of the things Hmong people will eat alongside their Kua Txob. Hmong people use rice as a staple, Oryza sativa. They'll also eat corn, zea maize, and a number of vegetables like cucumbers and squash. Soybeans in the form of tofu is very important to them dietarily. And then also, as we can see here, chiles. As for meat, they do enjoy beef, pork, and chicken, as well as the occasional fish. Remember when I talked about trading? Well, in the past, one of the major cash crops of the Hmong was poppies in the form of opium. That is how they managed to support themselves and stay independent for a number of years. The highland regions in which they lived were well adapted to the growth of these plants. The Hmong culture is complex and detailed. There are a lot of things that I could talk about, but one of the things I wanted to highlight was Hmong textiles. Here I have some examples of Hmong cloth. They use a sort of a batik method in order to put some of these colors on here, but they also use other styles of stitching as well. As you can see, they do a couple of different styles, and because of the multiple types of stitching and dyeing techniques they use, their cloths can be very intricate and have a lot of detail on them. Here's another example that I have right here. And if you could see it in person, you would be able to see the different textures on there as well. This bag that I have here is a particularly good example. Perhaps I just believe so because I like the color green, but it's made of multiple different types of cloth with different dyeing techniques and stitching to give it a lot of texture. One of their most type of textiles that they're famous for is something called bandal, which is a Hmong story cloth, and they use it to tell the story of their lives. So a bandal will illustrate the daily life of the Hmong. So you might see a bandal that shows what their village life was like, and then you might see a bandal that shows what their modern life is like, and another bandal that shows their another type of bandal will show their history, and it will contain images of them fleeing from persecution in Vietnam and making their way to Thailand. Let's check back into how the dish is coming together. It looks like I'm still pounding, still trying to work this thing into a nice paste. It certainly is an upper arm workout. I hope you guys are still hanging in there with me because we are finished. Now all we have to do is scoop this out of the large mortar and pair it with our food of choice. So I might have gone a little bit heavy on the cilantro here, but it really adds to the flavor. So now that we have our Kua Txob or Hmong pepper paste all prepared, it's time to have a taste. I have some crispy chicken wings here that will be perfect for this. I did a very minimal seasoning on them because all the flavor is right in there. I also have some little baby eggplants here as well. Any vegetable would probably be a really good way to try this. You can have as little as you want, usually just like letting it come in contact with the pepper paste is generally enough to get all the flavor and the heat. When they serve this in Hmong households, you'll get this real tiny small amount because that tiny small amount is all you need for a whole meal. So usually just like letting a little bit touch it is just enough. If you want, you try to get just a little bit of the seeds on there. And immediately there's this burst of flavor. You get the salty flavor from the fish sauce. It's definitely very spicy. You get all the cilantro, the citrus. It's amazing. I think for the wing though, I'm gonna have just a little bit more. Just a little bit more there for my first bite. There we go. It's intense, it's amazing, it's everything you want from a condiment. The heat is definitely like the most present feeling. That capsaicin reaction on your tongue is almost overwhelming, but it quickly falls to the back and get the wonderful flavor of all the peppers in there, the salt, the citrus, the cilantro. It's just everything you want from a great condiment. So I hope you take the time to try to make it yourself sometime. Thank you very much. Bye. That's it for this week's episode of Dr. Beck's Epicurean Delights. Let me know what you think. Please leave a comment down below, and if you liked it, don't forget to subscribe so you can catch more videos when I post them. Thanks a lot for watching. Catch you next week.